Okay, welcome back to InDesign. We're going to be talking today about linking images and text wrapping and using Photoshop and Illustrator as well in InDesign, and then also a little bit about packaging. So I'm going to start with linking your images. We've talked about how to get images into InDesign and how to change the settings with the frame and the image together. And so this is going to be a little bit about how those images don't live inside of InDesign. Okay, they're linked inside of InDesign. So I'm going to start by placing an image into InDesign. So I'm going to go to File, Place, and I'm placing a Photoshop image. So if you're going to follow along today, you're going to want to have an InDesign document open, and you're also going to want to have Photoshop open and some image open in Photoshop. You can also have Illustrator if you want. Either one is fine. Basically, I want to show you how Photoshop and Illustrator can work seamlessly with InDesign. Okay, so I could choose, there are lots of images, like image file types that I could choose. I could choose a PNG or a JPEG. The benefits of those type of images is that they are smaller file sizes, so they make your InDesign file overall smaller. But as far as I'm concerned right now, I have this image that I probably want to make edits to. So I want to save it as a Photoshop file, and I want to import it as a Photoshop file. And I think that'll become more apparent once we kind of get into more of these settings with your links. So the first thing that I want to talk about is how all images are linked into InDesign. So that means that this InDesign file, if you save it, and you take it and bring it onto a different computer, all those image files that you've used inside of this file will no longer exist in here. You'll have some thumbnails that'll look like the images, but the full resolution, high quality images won't be part of this file. Those exist outside of the file, so that's what's called linking, okay? Now the benefits to having a linked file is one, if you're working with other people on a project and you're all sharing this InDesign document, as one person updates an image or a link, it will show up in the document. Another option is if you have like multiple of the same images and you want to make edits to it, it will update to all of those files every time you have that image placed in there. So there's lots of benefits to linking your files. InDesign, because of the linked files, you have to package it, and we'll talk about that at the end of this session. But let's talk about this image right here. So once you place an image into InDesign, on your links panel, which if you don't see it over here on the right, you go to Window and then you go down to where it says Links, you can pop up that panel, and what you'll see is all the images that you have placed into InDesign will be listed right here. So this one is portrait.psd. That means it's a Photoshop file. And let's just talk a little bit about this links panel. So the first thing is I can select any one of my images that I have placed in here. And when I do, down at the bottom, you're going to see this link info. If you don't see it, there's this little arrow right here that'll help you expand it and show you those options. So basically down here, you have all the information that you would ever need to know about this particular image. It tells you what the format is, what page it's on in InDesign, the color space, the size, both the dimensions and the resolution, and what the actual resolution is, plus the effective resolution. So that means at this size, the resolution is 514, but in reality, at full size, the resolution would only be 72. Okay. It also tells you where it's saved on the where it's saved on your computer, the last time it was modified, etc., etc. Okay, so anything that you might need to know about that image is listed down here. Now I want to talk about these little icons at the bottom of the layers panel. So the first one you have here is relink from the CC libraries. So if you're using the CC libraries, that means that you have an account that's Adobe Creative Cloud, and on there is where you save all of your files. And so if you click on this, it'll take you to your CC library and allow you to place any images that you might have saved in your cloud. The next option is to relink it. So let's say I want to replace this image. The nice thing is if I have a template made and I know that I want to create the same image and I want to repeat it over and over again, let's say I'm just going to put this image that I have here, and I'm going to replace that image with this one. What's nice about this is that it maintains all the settings of that original photo, and any photo that you put in its place will just automatically come in. So this is really great for templates and stuff like that. I'm going to replace it with that original image that I was working with, the portrait image, which was on my desktop. All right, so now that I got that image back, now the next one is go to link. This is more helpful if you have, let's say, a lot of different pages on your document and you want to find out where a specific image is. So if I go to my pages panel, I just create a couple more pages here. Let's say I'm on page 5 and I go to my links panel and I say, where is this photo? I click on this, and what it'll do is it'll take me to that image on whatever page it is in my document. Okay, so that's just getting you to that particular link in your document. The next one is update link. We're going to come back to that one. And then the last one is edit original. So what this does, this edit original, is it opens up this particular image in whatever the default setting is for that file type. So if you're working with a JPEG on your computer, the default program for that file type might be preview, like it is on my computer. Right now I'm working with a Photoshop file, so when I click on this link, what it'll do is it'll take me to Photoshop. If I don't have Photoshop currently open, it will open the program and it will open that particular image. Now let's say you are working with a JPEG or a PNG or some other file type that doesn't open in Photoshop. You also have the option to go to the fly down menu at the top right and go to where it says edit with, and then you can choose one of these applications. And you can choose any of the Adobe applications. Probably you're going to choose Photoshop if it's a photo. So I'm just going to hit this little pencil here, and what that's going to do is it's going to take me into Photoshop. So now I've switched programs. I'm in Adobe Photoshop CC. And if I go into my layers panel, what I'm going to see here is I previously edited some of this to add some color. So let's say I'm going to just turn on my yellow and green hair color here. Okay. And I'm going to save that. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hit either Command S or I'm going to say File Save. And this is the important part, is I have to actually update this document and save it with my current changes. So that's why it's easier to work with a Photoshop file versus like a JPEG, because that means that if it's a Photoshop file, I can maintain all of these layers. Where if it's a JPEG file, I have to export it, save it as a JPEG, and compress all these layers, which means I no longer have the option to edit it unless I have a Photoshop file and a JPEG. So now I'm going to go back to InDesign, and what you're going to see is that my image automatically updated. Okay, and so now I have it in my document. I've got the yellow and green hair. Let's say I say, you know what? I actually don't like those colors for this document. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to hide that. I'm going to turn on my purple. I'm going to save it again. Now, when it's done saving, I have to wait because sometimes it takes a little bit longer. I'm going to go back to InDesign, and it'll update again. Now, sometimes if you make changes and you don't see that update, what you'll see is like this little yellow triangle on the top right or left of the document. And you'll also see it right here. Here you can see what, there's like a little example here, and it says status. And if you see that, there's two options. Actually, there's three options. One is you can double click on that item. The second one is you can double click on it over here in the links panel, or you can also click on this relink or update link option. So let me just try. I'm going to go back to Photoshop. I'm going to take a levels adjustment layer. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to adjust the levels, even though this image doesn't really need it. But let's say I want to make it a little bit darker. Then I'm going to save it again. Wait for that to save. I'm going to go back to my InDesign. And now here is it updated, but I'm not seeing it. So again, there's your little triangle. Again, here's your triangle. or I can click on that update link. And when I click on that, what it'll do is it'll update my image from the changes that I made. All right, so I'm going to go back to Photoshop, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, I want to show you text wrapping, which is basically means that you can wrap your text around any object that you have. So because of that, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to leave that purple on. I'm going to turn this levels layer off, and I'm going to turn this mask on. So this mask might be, I'm going to turn this background off. So you can see here that I basically cut out the portrait of this guy. So now I'm going to save it. And when I go back to InDesign, I'm going to update it. So again, you'll see that the little triangle is there. You can choose whatever way you want to update that. And so now I have this guy, and he actually doesn't have any background around him. So I'm actually just going to move him down to the bottom here. So he's kind of going off the page, because I hate that look of just like kind of like cut off, but no reason to be cut off in the middle. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you text wrapping. So basically, text wrapping starts off the same way that you create text anytime. I'm just going to create a text box. And in this situation, I'm going to fill it with placeholder text. So I'm going to go to type and fill with placeholder text. And when I click on that, it's going to fill it with that lorem ipsum. You can see that the text is actually going over top of this guy's face. Now, when you use text wrapping, basically you can use it with any shape. So I don't have to use a photograph like this. I can actually take a circle, and I can create a circle right here, holding down the shift key to maintain those proportions. All right, I'm going to move this circle over a little bit. All right, so I'm going to show you with the circle first, and then we'll talk about the image next. Okay, so what I want to do is when I want something to the text to wrap around it, I would select the object that I want the text to wrap around. Okay, not to be confused, I don't want you selecting the text. You're going to select the image or the object that you want the text to wrap around. So then we're going to go to Window, and you're going to go down to where it says Text Wrap, and that's going to open up a Text Wrap panel. So this panel has all the settings that you would need to wrap your text around anything, basically. Now that I have my shape selected, I'm going to select this first one, and this is wrap around the bounding box. So because I have a circle shape, you can see that bounding box, and that is what my text is currently wrapping around. You can see it doesn't go any further than this square here. Now, if I look at this in like a print preview, you can see that the bounding box isn't showing, but the text is still wrapping around that. Okay. The next option is to wrap around the object shape. Well, oops, I have to have it selected. When I do this, obviously it wraps around that circle. Now, with this particular object, I have a stroke on there, but I could also take the stroke off and kind of give the illusion that the text is wrapping around this circle that you can't see. And so now there's certain settings to this as well. So let's say I do have a stroke on here. If I do, what happens is my text becomes really close to this edge. And for readability reasons, actually, let's make this a little bit more dramatic. I'm going to go to my paragraph panel and make this justified so that all the text kind of goes all the way to the edge there. Let's make it force justified. All right, so now you can see that that text is really bumping up against the edge of that circle. And the problem is that if you were to have that in an actual document, it would make it really difficult for you to read the text. So we want to make it a little bit easier. So if you select the object and then you have this option here, which is like your outset setting or your outset spacing. So basically if I up this, what that's doing is it is pushing your text away from the object. It's still maintaining the same shape, but it's just giving that text some space. So again, if I deselect here and I look at it, this makes it much easier to read that text and even the implied object. Now, if you didn't have a stroke on your object, it wouldn't be as big of a deal if the text was wrapping up against that, because you wouldn't actually be able to see the image, and so your text has that open space that makes it easier to read. You have a couple other options here, and we're going to get into those in a little bit. The other options is that you can have, again, make sure your object's selected. You can have the text wrap above and below, and you can have it jump columns, which in this case, we don't really have any columns, but if we did, it would just jump to the next column. And then you can also invert the text, the wrapping, and let's see if we did this one, and then we said invert. Whoops, it would help if I had this selected again. Got to make sure that one's selected. So here's a situation where the text is being wrapped inside of the object. Okay. So let's say you had an outline of a person and you didn't have the image in there, but you wanted the text to go inside of that shape. You could definitely take the shape of his profile and then hit invert, and your text would fill in that space. But the other option for that is to just like use any sort of object as a text box, and it would do the same thing. The difference here is that it goes from a regular text paragraph into the circle and then out of the circle again. So that is how that works. All right. So I'm going to actually delete my circle here and put my text back to normal. And we're going to talk a little bit about wrapping it around a photo. So this basically works the same way. You would want to choose wrap around object shape. And in this case, my object shape is technically a rectangle. So I have to go down here to the contour options and change some of those settings in order to get it to actually wrap around his face. So down here where it says type, you can choose same as clipping. However, we're not using a clipping mask right now. What we're doing is we're using a layer mask in Photoshop. So bounding box, we already kind of talked about that. Detect edges. This is going to work if you have an image with a white background. You can see that it's detecting some of these shadows here. And here, and so any of where you see this like blue is kind of where that image is being pushed up against. Again, I can expand the edge a little bit so that it pushes the text away, so you're not getting some weird words here. This is moving a little bit slower, I think, because my this file is kind of big. And then the other option is your alpha channel. Your alpha channel basically mimics your layer mask. And so it's going to look at what you have in Photoshop, and it's going to mimic that. Now, you notice that there's like this weird word right here. So I could increase the outset for a little bit, but I can also go back to these wrap to options. And I could say, okay, just to the left side. And what that does is anywhere that's like kind of on the right side will not have text wrapping around it. And it gives me a little bit more control over where the text is and where the text isn't. And then there's a couple of other settings in here, like both right and left, side towards the spine. Largest area I also find to be super helpful because if you have little spaces like this, it doesn't acknowledge those as part of the shape. Okay. So that's basically it for text wrapping. However, I will say, like, sometimes, let's say, for instance, I'm going to bring my circle back and we'll make it kind of big. And I'm just going to say wrap around the actual circle. Now, the thing is like, let's say you bring a title in, and this isn't the best example, but I'm just going to say title. I'm going to center that both horizontally and vertically. So I'm going to go to Object, Text Frame Options. We talked about this in the last video, but just to review, there's a couple things in here that are really helpful when it comes to text wrapping. And in this situation, I'm going to center that vertically so that it's right in the middle of my text box. But you also see this, ignore text wrap. We're going to come back to that in a second. So basically, you'll notice already that it's not centered properly. And the bigger that I make this, if this starts to interfere with this circle, now let's say I wanted this circle to affect this type, but I didn't want it to affect this type. So what I would have to do is I would select this because I can't turn this off or it won't work for this either. So I have to select this text box and I have to go to, again, Object, Text Frame Options, also Command B, and I would just click on this box that says Ignore Text Wrap, and that way this text will go over this circle, but this text will acknowledge that text wrap. Okay, so that's really helpful because sometimes if you have text that's like not showing up, you might have text, like a text wrap on another text box or something else, and so that's important to kind of acknowledge. All right, I think I talked about those options with Command B, the text frame options. That's weird because it definitely said Command G, but I definitely hit Command B. There we go. Okay. So one of the other things is you can create columns here. So I selected this text box, and especially if you're doing something like a magazine design or anything that's like on a full page, you would probably want to add columns. And the reason for this is because when you have text that reaches like across an entire page, our eyes get tired pretty easily, which means that we might get kind of distracted and it's easily like boring or overwhelming for us to read all the way from one end of the page to the other. So columns makes it a lot more visually pleasing and makes it a lot more approachable as a reader. And as you guys know, probably already in society, we have enough trouble with like sitting down and reading something. And so anything to like make it more approachable for the reader is going to be welcomed. All right. So let's talk a little bit about packaging. So packaging basically is a way to kind of keep all the things inside of your document together. So let's say I wanted to send this to someone. First, I would have to save it as an InDesign file. And if you're planning on working on just your computer, you don't necessarily need to worry about packaging as much. I would always package at the end of a project so that you don't accidentally delete images that you have in one of your files. And then it's kind of like once you package it, you can kind of archive it and then delete all the extra files that you have on your computer. But if you don't package, you run the risk of like deleting images that you're using inside of your file. So what I'm going to do is once I've saved it as an InDesign file, I'm going to go down to where it says package. And the first tutorial that I gave you as an assignment did have this and explained why you have to package and how to package. But I just want to review it just for your records. So basically, when you select package, you're going to get all these options like fonts, links and images, colors and inks, print settings. So if you were to send a file to a printer, this would be important information that you would want to have. So let's see. This is giving me a notice right here because this image uses RGB color space. And if you were going to use it to print, you would want to make sure that that color space was actually CMYK. And so that's why it's just giving me kind of this like notice and error. It also would give me an error if there was overset text, which I believe we talked about in the other videos. Basically means that your text box has more text than what can fill in that text box. I'm just looking to see if I told you guys about text, linking text boxes, which I don't think I did. So I'm going to talk about that after this. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hit package. what this does is it takes all the images, all the fonts, everything that you used for this particular document. I'm going to save it to my desktop. Example folder, copy fonts, copy linked graphics, update graphic links in package, include IDML, which is a file that you can open up on different versions of InDesign. And it also includes your PDF. So if you, normally, if you were working on your own computer and you didn't need to package, instead of packaging to get your PDF, you could go to File, Export, and get your PDF. But in this situation, you can just package it and your PDF will already be included. And you'll notice here that I changed this to smallest file size. If you were sending it to a printer, you would want to use high quality print or press quality. And then you hit package and it's going to tell you, it's illegal to copy fonts. And you say, yes, I know. And then you hit OK. This is telling you that you have overset text, which I'm going to address in a second. And then you hit OK again. And then it's going to talk to you about colors and you hit OK again. And what it's going to do is on my desktop, if I show you, because it's in a second, it's going to take a while. So on my desktop here, here's my example folder. And basically I have all of my document fonts, my IDML file, my InDesign file, my PDF file, and then here are all my images that I have within that file. And there's only one here, and you can see that it's a portrait and my Photoshop file. So that's another thing is like, in this folder could become like pretty large if you're using all Photoshop files. So if you kind of like have confirmed that your file is exactly the way that you want it, you could export that as a JPEG or a PNG, and then have those images inside of your links folder. All right, so that's all there is for packaging. I'm going to talk quickly about overset text, and basically I had the print preview on, which I can do by hitting W, and that gets rid of all your lines and basically allows you to see the image and what it's going to look like when you export it as a PDF. When I don't have that available, you'll notice now I just put placeholder text in here. So I don't care if the text is completely showing or not, but if you were to copy and paste from like a Word document or something like that, and you needed all that text in there, it's important that you don't have any overset text. And sometimes overset text can just be like a space bar or a return key that kind of goes over into the next line. But when you have that, you're going to have this little red circle down here that's like an error. And you'll also see it on your text box. You'll see this little red plus sign. When you click on that red plus sign, basically what it's going to do is it's going to give you like a little preview of text. And when I click again, what it's going to do is it's going to create a text box. Now that I've created that text box from this one, what happens is that these two text boxes are actually linked, right? So if I make this text box smaller, the text from here is going to bleed over into the text here. Okay, so basically if you had like a Word document and you're copying and pasting the whole thing, you could have all those text boxes linked, and so that way you could know that like all the text was available to you. Because if I have more text, I can just make this text box larger until all of my text is showing in that text box. So here it is. I can see all of it now, and that red plus sign is gone. And down here it says that there are no errors. If you want to see like what text boxes are connected to each other, you can go to where it says view, and then you can go to where it says extra and show text threads. And what that's going to do is it's going to show all my text boxes, like this text box is connected to this text box. And I can also add text boxes in between or at the end. So if I wanted to do that, all I would have to do is there's these little boxes, the little boxes with triangles in them, and I click on that box, and then I can draw a text box, and what it'll do is it'll put one in between this one and this one. If I want to unlink this box, I can click on the little square with a triangle here, and you'll actually see like a broken link file, and then I can click here, and what that'll do is it'll unconnect these two text boxes from one another. I can reconnect them easily by just clicking on that plus sign and then clicking on a text box that's already created. So when you have that overset text, you don't just have to create another text box. If you have another text box that is already created, you can just link it to the one before. Okay, that's linking text boxes. So just a review, I covered image linking, working with Photoshop and Illustrator in InDesign, and then also text wrapping and text linking and packaging. Okay, so I hope this video helped, and let me know if you have any questions.